Chair, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum. It was wonderful to be introduced by someone in an unexpectedly Scottish accent. And it's wonderful to see this crowd gathered here and the level of organization which has clearly gone into this important conference. And I should like to apologize to the speakers who have gone before me that I missed their address, largely thanks to a diversion on the motorway, and I hope they will forgive me. No impoliteness was intended. I was very glad to receive this invitation when I saw the title, From Jerusalem to Baghdad, hearing the screams, From Jerusalem to Baghdad, because it will be my contention that the issues, that the criminals, that the victims in both stories, the story of Jerusalem and the story of Baghdad, are one and the same. And I seek to develop the argument that our approach to both conflicts, both injustices, must be exactly the same. But first I want to start with an anecdote which some of you may have heard from me before. If so, forgive me. But I think that it is a useful portal through which we can approach this question. Just after 9/11, I was in one of my interminable battles with the then spokespeople for the war party. They're not so easily found now. It's amazing how difficult it is to find anyone who agreed with the attack on Iraq now. But then they were out and proud. And in the middle of the battle, the radio announcer asked us to pause and listen to a tape. It was a tape of the heartbreaking messages of farewell, messages of love, left by the American women on the aeroplanes on 9/11, left from their mobile phones on the answering machines of their families as they hurtled to their deaths. And a few heartbreaking moments later, the tape finished and the announcer turned to me with a smug look on his face and said, "That's what this war is all about. That's what the attack on Afghanistan is all about. What do you have to say for yourself now?" Clearly thinking he'd scored a knockout blow. And I answered, just because Afghan women don't have mobile telephones and their families don't have answering machines, doesn't make their deaths delivered from the sky any less obscene than the deaths of those American women on those airplanes on 9/11. Now, I and you clearly hold that truth to be self-evident. But when I repeated what I've just said to you in the House of Commons some days later, as I looked around at the powerful men, and they were mainly men, and the women weren't any better, who were determined to bring death and destruction to the women of Afghanistan as they later would the women and children and men of Iraq, I could see etched into their faces the simple truth, and it is a simple if appalling truth, that the powerful and the rich people who inhabit our world simply do not accept that the blood of Afghans, the blood of Palestinians, the blood of Iraqis is worth the same as the blood of Americans, Israelis, British, Australian, or the others. That's a simple, if unpalatable truth. It must be true. Nobody's even counted the deaths in Afghanistan, let alone giving them names and faces, let alone holding moments of silence to commemorate their deaths, let alone holding concerts to raise money to ease the pain and agony of the people whose lives have been destroyed in Afghanistan. Nobody pays very much attention when we see, if we're lucky, in the sidebar of the newspapers, that a Palestinian died today in the Gaza Strip, or 5 died. Maybe if 10 died, it will make a news story. But even if 10 die, and even if it is a news story, there will be no footage of the grieving relatives. There will be no analysis of the family life that they left behind. There will be no mourning of any kind in the Western media about the deaths of Palestinians on a day and daily basis. Yet every one of us knows this simple truth. If, la samahallah, there is a so-called suicide bomb today in Tel Aviv, and if, God forbid, it kills 10 Israeli civilians, that will be the first item on the news. It will be on the news tomorrow and the next day, and it will be ruthlessly used by Sharon and his propaganda machine for many weeks and months to come, justifying all sorts of much bigger crimes. And 10,000 civilians and counting have now perished as a result of the attack upon Iraq by the British and American armed forces almost exactly 1 year ago. I mention that figure for 2 reasons. First of all, because nobody else does. The news tells you every day that an American soldier, or 2 or 3 American soldiers, have been killed by the Iraqi resistance in Iraq, but nobody even counts the civilian death toll, which is mounting at a far greater rate. But I mention it for another reason too, because 10,000 Iraqi civilian dead is a drop in the ocean compared to the more than 1 million Iraqis, mainly children, most of them dying before they even knew that they were Iraqis, but who died for no other reason than that they were Iraqis, under the murderous sanctions regime maintained almost wholly on the basis of the United States and United Kingdom government's support. I know that, and I can show you my scars, because I was one of the few people in mainstream politics who spent almost all of the 1990s saying an Iraqi child is dying every 6 minutes of every day and every night of every year on the blunt instrument of sanctions.